We're just going to talk a little bit about the background, the context, and then move as quickly as possible to the demonstration, moving to the experiment in open teaching and sharing some of the things that we've noticed from the first few units of the project. Just a little bit about the project. It's a project that grew out of some individuals from the Open Society, which is a foundation that's funded by the Soros Foundation in West Africa, who actually attended one of George's keynotes in Ghana. And then we had some further online discussions on Skype and various various virtual interactions about the absence of participation, in activities from West Africa, despite the fact that they felt there was a fair amount of infrastructure technologically. So we put together a project that was funded eventually by the Open Society that involved the African Association of Universities through the Research and Education Networking Unit, our university, and the funder became the Open Society Institute in West Africa. We really wanted to look at administrators, teachers, some decision makers, and in West African institutions that could think about how they might wish to use social networking technologies and how they could really transform teaching and learning. And we really linked that with very much the mission of Open Society. The Open Society Association had done some really interesting work around AfricanElections.com and looking at how social networking could predict election results. So they were looking at informal predictors and the relationship of informal predictors to creation of a more democratic civil society. So what we wanted to do was to find ways that we collectively could think about transforming some of the teaching and learning environment within both our institutions and the multiple institutions in West Africa, with the end that as students may be engaged in different ways, in non-hierarchical ways, that this would have an eventual result as in the qualities of a graduate. The qualities of a graduate could think more critically about their environment, that would look beyond some of the discussions just within the classrooms and networking beyond. I think one of the other things that we really noticed was that, and I think Emma attested to that we had 6 individuals who wanted to attend, and the opportunities for people just travel, despite the fact that we talk about living in a very globalized world in which we really have free movement. That was an issue that we really faced, and the opportunities for anybody to participate or be within a global discussion was often online only. And I think this kind of reflects some of the work that George and I were involved in before in the West Bank and their move to sort of create an opportunity for a couple of classrooms, because mobility becomes a huge issue. And it was very interesting as they moved from the model of the OU UK in sort of 1979, where they had just print-based, and moved to actually having, using Illuminate, using some tools. And I think one of the interesting spin-offs, and I guess I can speak of this as an administrator, was that they started to have the department meetings between the department in Gaza and the departments in the West Bank on Illuminate. And before that, they just never had meetings, or they tried to use really bad cell phone connections. So it was the whole idea of how we could use social networking in the classroom, but also in Africa. How could it create a more inclusive environment? How could we get us to interact at a different level rather than just interacting and reading an article? How could we actually interact with faculty members? So the process, we began with a 2-day workshop, and we were hoping that this group of faculty and administrators would become the incubation unit. We quickly realized that despite the fact that the initial workshop was in English, we really needed to have a bilingual presence. And as good Canadians who aren't very bilingual, we negotiated with an individual that was quite fluent, and so we ended up doing a mirrored course in which we attracted people, and website reference resources eventually, because as all sort of projects have to have a tangible outcome. We really had the outcome is to be sort of a redesign of a learning activity, and then eventually sustainability of a website and network. And I think the interesting thing that we were able to do, and again, coming from a very traditional university where we can really never tell faculty what to do, fortunately, George and the other individuals teaching agreed to make this an experiment in open teaching, which led to some very interesting results. The idea was open teaching. We thought from our discussions with African Association of Universities, we'd have a lot of participants from African universities. We ended up with a lot of participants from around the world. So that was also quite interesting.
And I'll just talk a little bit about the guiding theory, which, given some of the things that I spoke of this morning and that other colleagues spoke about, I think you have some awareness of. But largely the mindset was to duplicate some of the attributes that we tried to include in designing CCK 08 and 09. My view, at least, is that when you learn transparently, you become a teacher, because you teach those who observe, you teach those who are attending to your own learning. And that means that people are at different levels, right? So one student who's quite advanced will likely either start to teach or mentor others who aren't as advanced. It's back to that old, one schoolhouse model. I'm not sure, you used to have this in Canada, at least, southern Manitoba. I remember we still had a place we took on field trips to see these schools. And you would have everybody from grade 6 down to kindergarten. And you actually, there's studies that have been done that talk about the value of these systems, because what you have is learners becoming teachers as they develop in their competence. And it's a very effective learning model. So when you learn transparently, what you're really doing is you're turning the internet into a schoolhouse, because you're allowing those who've mastered the concepts to begin to mentor others or teach others who are still developing at a different stage. So we really wanted to emphasize a social, connected, pedagogical model, also known as connectivism. One of the difficulties that we face, and we'll talk a little bit, and Kathleen and I will talk about some of the challenges that we encountered, but we have a goal, at least, of learner autonomy, and I don't know, at this point, I would say the approach wasn't as successful as I had hoped. When we started the course, it was Dave Cormier from University of Prince Edward Island. It was the French instructor in the course, and we've taught several English courses together. And so we started out wanting intentionally, and it was what we told the students is, we are familiar with educational technologies. I mean, that's our lives. This is what we do each day, spend time online, interacting, communicating, sharing. But we recognize that the African context is one that we cannot wholesale import our views into. And so we intentionally tried to pull back as educators in the course so that our particular views and perspectives weren't dominant in their expression. And what we told the students was, the byproduct here is we are learners about the context of your region of Africa. By the way, one thing, it's just a random point that bugs me sometimes, and I do it all the time myself. Africa is the only place of the world that I treat as one big entity, right? It's like I'm saying, the Western world to include all these individual countries. So I don't know why I do that, but anyway. So what ended up happening was we wanted to emphasize learner autonomy and self-efficacy. We were going to teach them about learning technologies as we understood it. We were asking them to teach us about their context within their particular country or region of a country. Strongly emphasize learner direction, right? They choose, we put resources, we made resources available. We were very aware of bandwidth limitations. We had done a bit of work in Africa in the past, either through projects or through traveling. So we were aware of some of the unique elements, and we were very conscious of not importing what you would look at as a Western view of curriculum and dropping that into an African context. So we were aware of bandwidth issues, electricity. I mean, in some cases, there's students that, and we have this now where they can't get online because they don't have electricity that particular day or that particular time of the day. So those were things we were aware of, and we quite we wanted to keep the content general enough so that it could be contextualized. So if we said this is social pedagogy with network technologies, one of our expectations of the students was that they would come back and say, in our experience, this won't work here because we deal with this and this and this. And so they would shape the curriculum with their context, which in turn would be an educational opportunity for us as well. I'm just going to quickly look at the courses, the way they're set up. We used Wikiversity. We initially thought, should we use University of Manitoba? We have an media wiki site set up as well. And so we decided, no, we would go with Wikiversity for the sake of supporting Wikiversity, which is a great project, but also so if for any reason we didn't have our site available, there was still a copy of it. And basically it's set up with, as you can see, the introduction, the general objectives. Gotta love those objectives, and a bit of talk facilitator-wise. And then we mentioned the course structure. Typically, when we've taught CCK 08 and 09, we've gone with a complexity model, which is throw so much stuff at you that you have to cry uncle and accept that you cannot manage everything, and then begin to network so you can break out of that code of structured content. We were cautious of that here, recognizing that in certain instances, that mindset of needing a certain degree of guidance seems to still be somewhat prominent from what we were told with Barry Boubacar, the African representative from the Association of African Universities. And but we mentioned it was an open course. There's a Moodle area that's set up. We send out regular discussions or via email. We have two versions. There's the French version, which launches just to the French wiki page and the contents within that, and then of course it links to the Moodle site. So that in a nutshell is the course. Nothing revolutionary there. The main thing we applied was openness to the process. Now I won't go into the Moodle site because it's just a Moodle site, but I'd like to talk a little bit, actually, Kathleen and I can chat a bit about the preliminary observations as a result of this.
Okay. It was, as George said, it was a slow start. I think one of the things that we had to deal with is that we have these ingrained start dates and finish dates, so we kept having to move them because various things happened. Students' emails changed, students changed jobs, etc. But I think the more interesting thing was that the participant profile was there was only 4 individuals from the original sort of incubation group that have become active participants. And then we thought, we looked at the statistics and, is participation necessarily within their context sharing and debating ideas? And we were talking about this earlier, and maybe this whole idea of transforming teaching, is that what we want to do, and is that our agenda, or is it the agenda within the participants' universities?
I mean, there was certainly the profile we found that we had more participation from non-African learners. These were often, we weren't sure, was it sort of a consulting focus, or was it somebody who represented an agency that had an interest in funding African projects? As a result, there were concerns or questions at least about the mix of the conversations that were going on, because we found that it started to take on a very traditional kind of a discussion tone, rather than an emphasis being on the pedagogical needs that they have in their own environments. And this, I guess it really gets to this sense of what is effective participation in an open course. If you're familiar with the work of Lave and Wenger, where they've suggested, this notion of legitimate peripheral participation. If you ever want to be an educational theorist, first thing you need to learn is syllables rule. And essentially what they argue is that, as we grow into a group setting, into a community, we often sit on the outside and observe until we gain a sense of comfort with protocol, and then we start to participate. I hate that model. Because I think when you're a learner at ground zero, you have things to contribute. A community of practice, legitimate peripheral participation model suggests that there is a group of people who know, and then there's a group of people who don't know, and the people who don't know can't contribute until they've observed the protocols. And my view is the exact opposite. Dive right in, participate where you are, share, form connections where you are, because you forming connections with other learners at your stage is a valuable experience. Now, this gets back to what Kathleen said. Is that what the learners wanted in the course? And we found that so far, at least, we've had significant difficulty increasing participation. Then we had a gentleman, believe he was from Nigeria.
Yeah, Jos University.
Okay.
Who has participated.
And so we've had a few different individuals who've joined. There's one individual who's doing some work with Athabasca University, and he asked in our group, because it's a group of educators in Africa, can they join? And I said, well, absolutely, it's an open course. We want anyone to join. And so we found a very interesting dichotomy between when we met face-to-face in Dakar, and we spent 2 days, intensive days with this group. My luggage didn't come, so I had to go street shopping and found a lovely outfit, so you should see my nice white shoes. And experience was very positive, high level of engagement, active involvement, active contributions, critiquing, sharing their context, the experience that they faced. And then we moved online and we lost all of that. At least we think we did. Maybe they're having wonderful, engaging conversations without us. I don't know.
Yeah, and what we've essentially done, and I guess it becomes an ethical question, is that we've essentially taken funding from West Africa and developed an open teaching course that is populated by everybody except West Africans. Interesting idea, and I remember reading an article that the president of Alamea University in Ethiopia had written, and he's an agricultural economist, and he talked about how much of the Ethiopian GNP had been spent on educating faculty members in North America and the UK. So that was a real ethical question. So how do we, are they, is this engagement relative, or is it our agenda, or is it their agenda? And we talked about some of the issues, like definitely technical issues, and bandwidth, etc. But then we forget that the technical issue is electricity, and it became, even as we were putting the proposal together, electricity became an issue. Cultural issues. Do you want to really debate? Depending on cohorts that you're working with. And I guess we did try to involve 2 or 3 people from each institution, because we felt that then there was a better discussion offline, a face-to-face discussion. And then we realized perhaps their systems are more hierarchical than ours. And that was a situation that I had in another institution in another part of the world, where nobody wanted to participate in the wiki where we were developing a course, because the dean, they didn't want to have their comments underneath the dean's comments. So is that the issue? Are people afraid to is there a hierarchy? And then the whole idea of design and pedagogy, is this our agenda, or is this really what's wanted? And I think, we talked about that a little bit at lunch and said maybe they really like this model where you have aligned curriculum and outcomes and you stand up and you're here for 2 hours. But it...
Well, and that's, I think, really the question for us, at least, and this is our final slide. We've got about, 10, 15 minutes for questions now. If you're familiar with Bandura's work on self-efficacy, and he emphasizes that self-efficacy is really the view that we can make significant and substantial influence on our overall world. And so that it's this perspective that I can be a first causal agent. I can change things. If I study hard, I can succeed. If I participate, I can learn. And so some of these principles of self-efficacy, and you really quickly come up against the theorists that we're citing to interpret the African context is biased toward our context, because we're theorizing and we're seeing it through their theorizing. So there's a skewing even of the theory that we're trying to extract, because it comes from a particular perspective. And so ultimately, we are saying there's a few things that are at stake here. One, we have a pedagogical failure, right? The model that we selected for engaging with these students was the inappropriate model. 2, there's brilliant, incredible learning happening that we're just not aware of, which we couldn't even comment on, right? That which you can't comment on. Anyway, and then there's the final point, which is you know, that perhaps we have an issue of learner development, right? Like, is this a concern where there needs to be an intermediate stage of development? Is this a group of students, as Kathleen mentioned, who feel uncomfortable posting on a wiki or correcting and editing a change that a dean has made, or commenting on a dean's blog post and saying, oh, I disagree with that? Is that a cultural issue that exists here? So to what degree is self-efficacy being hampered? Because you need a degree of self-efficacy to be an active participant in network learning. By very nature, it requires engagement and participation. And so our question is the system or the culture hampering self-efficacy, or is it our pedagogical model that's at fault?
And I guess I just wanted to say one of the comments that we got back was that it's just life is difficult. You know, the things that we take for granted are sometimes unsurmountable. You know, transportation, everything from transportation to electricity. So when you're dealing with multiple problems, going online is the thing that you leave till the very end, because what's right in your face is what you deal with. So somewhat simplistic analysis, but I think we have to remember that.
And it is ongoing. I mean, keep in mind, we're still looking at the course, trying to find ways to tweak and adjust, but we'll leave it there. Questions, comments, reactions?